Introduction. I as an illusion. Who are you? Answering this question, you will most likely introduce yourself, but a name is just a designation, after all, others need to call you somehow. Hidden within the seemingly simple question, who are you, is a much more complex one. What makes you you? To answer it requires, just as when we ask a computer to think about itself, quite a contortion. Only this time the computer contorting in calculations is our brain. And like in Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, even the observation of the process itself has a decisive influence on the result. Most people understand our question as asked in the singular, whereas in reality, each of us has at least 3 versions of self-perception. The first exists in the present, and it is this one we are accustomed to considering as ourselves. It is this I reading this sentence. It is this I feeling everything you feel right now. It is the one sensing the chair you sit in, its seat and backrest, which compress or straighten as you move. It is this I that hears the sounds reaching you, or, if you are listening to an audiobook, perceives the timbre of the narrator's voice. However, this current I is nothing more than an illusion. The current I is transient. How can it be permanent when time does not wait, and in the milliseconds it takes to process sensations from sitting in the chair, this I has already receded into the past. When you stub your little toe on a table leg, it will take a couple of seconds before the brain even notes this pain. Even when it seems that we live in the present, in the moment, as numerous self-development gurus say, we are actually stuck up to our ears in the past. This is the second version of our I, and when we are asked who we are, in reality we automatically refer exactly to it. It is rooted in the past like a tree in the soil, and our self-perception, our identity, rests on these roots. But although we are so inclined to define ourselves by questionnaire categories, occupation, marital status, no verbal labels convey the full depth of questions of self-identification. The past I begins with our earliest memories, but it should not be imagined as a film reel. At least because memories, unlike a film, cannot be rewound like a tape. You can extract some fragments, replay short clips, but all this is no more than frames from a trailer. For most of us, our entire past, contradictory, complex, confused, boils down to a montage of the most impressive moments. We glue them into one tape, shaping it into a narrative, a continuous story, seemingly smoothly leading to our current I. From it, as logic suggests, we move to the third I, the future. And although the future I by its nature is vague, its function is at once pragmatic and inspiring. When it seems we are in the present, our brain not only processes past events, but also builds predictions for the near future. Every movement we make, whether getting up from the couch to look in the fridge or crossing a busy street, is accompanied by serious planning. The brain is essentially a predictive machine that allows us to stay at least one step ahead of the constantly changing world. This is why, among other things, it is so difficult for us to live in the present. Throughout evolution, our brain developed to anticipate the future. Usually our past, present, and future, IS, seamlessly merge into a continuous stream of existence. This too is an illusion, but generally a useful one since most of us do not change much day to day. You from the day before yesterday are likely almost indistinguishable from you today and from you tomorrow. To see differences between these aspects, one must take longer time intervals. On photographs, especially from your relatively distant past, the difference can be stunning. Sometimes it seems that there is a completely different person before us, because in reality, that is true. Over the course of growing up, we change so much that on a physical, even cellular level, you in the past and you in the present are indeed 2 completely different people. So who are you? Answer: you are who you consider yourself to be. As we will soon find out, the question of self-identification boils down to the question of self-perception, namely what a person thinks about themselves. Take, for example, gender identity, which until quite recently was considered an objective and immutable component of identity. They say, just look in the mirror, and you will see everything yourself, the body shape and the genitalia given to you, or absent, at birth. But now we understand. How we handle this information, our own gender identity, who we feel ourselves to be, whether it matches or not the physical signs of our sex, is a matter of perception, and perception is a process occurring in our brain. In recent years, the neurobiology of perception has experienced rapid growth. Thanks to advances in neuroimaging, we have learned that perception is merely an amalgam of physical reality filtered through our past experience. This process is imperfect because our worldview is limited by the features of our senses. Every moment, the brain must make the most probable guess about the source of incoming sensory data. Which objects emit the photons currently bombarding our retina? What animal or mechanism produces the sound vibrating our eardrum this second? Often the answer is ambiguous, so to interpret what is seen or heard, the brain must rely on past experience. However, the memory capacity of our brain computer is limited. It compresses memories into something like low-resolution video, which causes errors when trying to access it and leaves, due to its vagueness, room for alternative interpretations. Thus, our self-image is largely formed by our memories of past experience, though imperfect. And here we return to the self-reflecting computer. The mystery of constructing our identity boils down to how our brain thinks about itself. You are probably already wondering, who is this person, or rather, who does he think he is, who declared your self-perception a fusion of possibly faulty memories? I have a medical background, I am a psychiatrist, but I work in computational neurobiology. In simpler terms, I study how the brain performs its calculations. And although the way an artificial computer operates differs from the brain, it nevertheless also represents a computational machine. According to modern estimates, the human brain contains about 8 billion neurons, and each of these nerve cells can receive incoming signals from thousands of other neurons, process this data in some way, and send the result to thousands of other neurons. Any of our sensations are the result of computational operations. When photons hitting our retina are transformed into the sensation we experience looking into the eyes of a loved one, a computational operation is performed. The symphony of coordination of motor neurons and muscles, allowing a professional golfer to propel a ball nearly 300 meters to the center of the field in one stroke, is a computational operation whose result is the precise transfer of energy from the body to the club and from it to the ball. Even what we call emotions, love, hate, shame, joy, are computations produced in the brain. Although some scientists try to prove that the nature of these computations cannot explain the associated subjective sensations and experiences, let alone understand how their sum creates our self-image, I hold a more optimistic view. Our knowledge of how the brain works is growing rapidly. I believe we will soon understand how not only the emotions we experience, but also our very identity arise from the symphony of neural activity. This revolutionary breakthrough is due to two factors. The first is new technologies such as neuroimaging, which have given us unprecedented opportunities to peek into the brain's computational process. Now scientists see how these computations relate to observable behavior and, in humans, to internal experiences. The second factor is the fantastic advances in artificial intelligence, AI development, which neuroscience eagerly incorporates. While neuroscience previously focused primarily on localizing brain functions, machine learning now takes the lead. Since the brain is incredibly complex, neuroscience experiments generate enormous amounts of data that no human can process alone. But a human can effortlessly feed all this data to AI algorithms, using machine learning to detect patterns that would otherwise remain unnoticed. It seems obvious that self-identification is only possible with consciousness. When there is no consciousness, we cannot think about anything, including ourselves. Yet being conscious, we fully realize that we are separate individuals with our own sensations. This form of consciousness corresponds to the current I. Combining this fleeting form with its past and future, we obtain our unique identity. To develop a theory of self-identification, we may not need to solve the difficult problem of consciousness. It may suffice to understand how the brain links the current I with the past and the future. It is precisely for this that humans have developed a unique cognitive skill. We tell stories. Now, after millions of years of evolution, the storytelling ability is embedded in the human psyche. Our powerful brain allows us to achieve the greatest heights, to discover DNA, send humans into space, create incomparable works of art. Our biological species owes all this to that very skill, the ability to tell stories. No other animal possesses it. The same applies to self-identification. Our concept of self is a story that unites our past, present, and future. I It is a cognitive construct that allows us to maintain the necessary illusion that you have always been and remain the same person. How you tell this story to yourself or others is the narrative that fills your life with meaning. From a neurobiologist's perspective, narratives are computations produced by our brain. Unlike face recognition algorithms, which are limited to simple pattern matching, a narrative organizes events, giving them plot significance. But since the number of events that could hypothetically occur in our world is practically infinite, does this mean there could be infinitely many narratives? Not at all. As any seasoned reader or moviegoer can confirm, our brain, through evolutionary development, has adapted to sort these chains of events into a relatively small number of narrative categories. And it is easy for us to get stuck on a familiar pattern. When I was a practicing psychiatrist, I dealt with patients whose personal narratives had tormented them so much that they sought help. Looking back now, I realized that I simply could not help many of them because I did not have the necessary tools at the time. Medications could ease symptoms of anxiety and depression, but no pill could correct a personal narrative. Now the situation is beginning to change with the spread of psychedelics, but even with medicinal support, switching narratives on the fly is impossible. A narrative moves like a massive supertanker with enormous inertia, so turning such a behemoth requires preparation and much energy. Imagine a heavily loaded ship crossing the ocean. The captain receives information that a hurricane is forming directly on the course. If it is still far away, the ship can avoid the storm. But if time or fuel is limited, the captain has no choice but to break through the storm, hoping for the best. The same happens with narratives. If there is enough time and energy, the probability of changing a hardened scenario exists, but the ability to change it is not limitless. It is no surprise that long-established, entrenched narratives are harder to change than newly invented ones. More dogmatic, conservative personalities are less likely to change their narratives than cognitively more flexible and open to new experience people. Our cognitive rigidity can, to some extent, be conditioned by the first stories we hear in childhood. If these first stories are told in a moralizing tone, and the hero always does the right thing, such a pattern is difficult to break later in life. Moreover, people who avoid risk, who are anxious or depressed, also do not particularly strive to adjust the course of their personal narrative, and now we have data on biological changes that help explain why our brain loses plasticity with age. A variety of reasons prevent us from rewriting the story of our identity, but the first step to change is to learn how narratives actually arise. This book tells how the brain constructs life narratives, thereby creating our sense of self. The path is complex and long because a human life includes not only everything that has ever happened to them, but also everything they have learned or adopted from others. Everything contained in our brain is already ours, no matter where it came from. Add to this content the constantly changing physical substrate called the organism, and here before us stands a truly difficult problem in all its glory. Therefore, to avoid trying to embrace the ungraspable, I decided to sequentially highlight 5 key topics that, if not providing an exhaustive answer, will at least outline its contours. Each of them will appear throughout the narrative, arising in different contexts. Epistemology. This is a branch of philosophy that studies knowledge and the ways of acquiring it. Although to non-epistemologists this problem may seem quite abstract, knowledge plays a key role in our self-perception. For example, as I have already said, I am a doctor and a specialist in neuroscience. This is a quite logical extract from my self-identification. But how should you know that this is indeed me? Because I told you so. We will return to this topic more than once throughout the book. Compression. The second topic follows from the first and relates to how the brain stores information. I have already noted that the brain is not a perfect recording device. It compresses memories using algorithms similar to those of streaming audio and video. It uses early experience, childhood and adolescence, as a set of templates for subsequent experiences. Thus, most empirical memories are stored as deviations from the first experience. Since our memories are the foundation of our self-perception, understanding the processes of compression restoration means approaching the realization of how malleable our identity is. Prediction. If compression is related to the representation of our past, I, then prediction concerns how the brain views our future, I, thanks to the explosive growth of data, we learn myriad ways the brain functions as a predictive mechanism. Prediction is firmly embedded in the brains of all animals, allowing a predator to catch prey and potential prey to avoid becoming someone's dinner. For humans, prediction is necessary not only for basic survival functions, but also comes into play when we try to outsmart our biological peers or decipher their intentions. Prediction is the forward-looking edge of identity. It makes us think about our future, I, and its interaction with others. Prediction can generate both hope and anxiety. Dissociation. This term suggests psychiatry and mental disorders, but in reality, dissociation occasionally occurs in each of us. It is not a symptom of psychopathology, but a normal cognitive process. When thinking about our past and future selves, we must free ourselves, detach from the present, and see through the eyes of those, others, people we believe we were or might be. This is the same process by which we imagine ourselves as heroes of a film or book. Do not be frightened by the word dissociation. This term denotes a valuable tool that allows us to change our perception of the past and imagine the future differently. Narrative. This is the glue that connects all the disparate components. We tell ourselves and others stories about who we consider ourselves to be, and we listen to others, stories hoping they somehow clarify the meaning of life. Throughout the book, I will return to the question of how we use narratives to organize the information overwhelming our brain. Narratives affect the brain, whether we tell the story to ourselves or receive it in the form of a novel or film. I repeat once more, everything contained in our brain is already part of us. We will examine how the narrative templates floating in our heads mix and how in this nourishing medium our sense of self takes shape. And I hope I will manage to convince you, even if you think you know who you are, your narrative is still far from set in stone and far from complete. You have the power to change it, if you wish. The stories we hear shape our narrative, so by changing the stories we allow through ourselves, we inevitably change our own. We will talk about how to learn from the mistakes of the past so that the future, I, will not have to regret what today's I does. By the end of our journey, you will see how these topics come together into the many qualities we consider desirable. To uphold moral principles, live a worthy life without regrets, and keep away from the false narratives surrounding us. I hope you will not only better understand your concept of self, but also learn how to manage the process and create a narrative for your future, I. Part I through time. Chapter 1. You are a simulation. Every year I teach an advanced neuroimaging course where students learn to design and conduct experiments using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. It is a practical course, so during one of the sessions they diagnose each other, taking turns lying in the fMRI machine. I am always fascinated by their reactions to scans of their own brains, that curious mix of excitement and disappointment. At first, a person understandably gasps, but then the wonder inevitably turns into rejection, a refusal of the clump of convolutions that makes us who we are. Like the moment when Toto pulls back the curtain hiding the Wizard of Oz, and we flash the puzzled thought. Is that all? The brain is literally unfathomable to us. It cannot be seen from the inside, nor can it be touched. The brain interprets sensory data coming from everywhere except itself. If your stomach hurts, you acutely and painfully feel what is happening inside your body. The stomach can be pressed or poked. The organs inside can be felt from outside or even inside. But the brain is inaccessible to touch or sensation. It feels nothing. So some spleen is probably more familiar and closer to us than the brain. Like the Wizard of Oz, the brain apparently creates a simulacrum, a low-fidelity simulation, but not of itself, rather of all other parts of the body except itself. And it is this construction that we perceive as our I. In other words, you are a simulation. Stop, you say. Wait a minute. Yes, I cannot touch the brain, but it is connected to the rest of the body, and my body is definitely real? That is true. We can touch our hands and feet. We feel the gentle sun rays on our skin, the taste of chocolate on our tongue. We move, we act. What kind of simulation is that? If you break a glass in a door, shards will scatter. That is a physical fact. Everyone present will confirm it. We see each other and interact together with the environment, so our existence has some degree of physical reality. However, physical reality helps little here. Two people looking at the same object may differ greatly in what they think they see. This difference in perception is especially acute in subjective evaluation, impressions of art, music, cuisine. And I am not talking about one person liking something and another not. We have all compared our perception with others, and discovered that we saw and heard the same thing quite differently. Partly this relates to our embodiment. Two witnesses to the same event look at it through different eyes, since each is in their own body, and thus each will have their own observational position, their own point of view, differing from the other in one way or another. Usually, these initial differences cause only slight differences in perception, but not always. States of strong arousal, for example, during a car accident or situations involving physical violence, are known to significantly affect both perception and memory. That is why eyewitness testimonies can be so unreliable, and why it is so important to seek additional evidence to establish the truth, if it exists at all. We will delve into the problem of differences in perception in the following chapters, but for now let's focus on you. More precisely, on how you perceive yourself and how this determines your self-concept. Most likely, you take self-perception for granted. The simplest example, you know what you look like. For this, if you have no vision problems, it is enough to stand in front of a mirror and your mental portrait is ready. And although this portrait seems absolutely objective, in reality, only one person sees you that way, yourself. No one else in the entire world sees you exactly like that. This happens because the image in our perception is a mirror reflection of the image formed when others look at us. And the difference between them is not insignificant since no person is symmetrical. We part our hair left or right. When we talk or smile, one corner of the mouth may lift higher than the other. Or perhaps, like me, you have heterochromia, eyes of different colors. A photograph, unlike a mirror image, captures us exactly as others see us. That is why sometimes it seems that the person in the photo is not you but someone else. This distorted self-perception is even more evident when we hear a recording of our voice. Usually on audio, it sounds nasal to us. I don't want to upset you, but that is exactly how it really sounds. Like the reflection in the mirror, the voice we hear during live speech is our distorted, unique perception. While the rest of the world hears your voice as sound waves propagating through the air, you hear an additional sound coming from your mouth and resonating through vibrations in the bones of your skull. It is deep and clear because hard substances like bone conduct better than air. In our heads, we all hear our voice as perfectly broadcasted. These distortions in self-perception are immediately recognized, yet most of us continue to believe that our voice sounds exactly as it does in our ears, and our face is exactly as we see it in the mirror. Why is this so? Each of us constructs an image that exists in our head and only there. Or, as I prefer to say, our brain simulates how we look and how our voice sounds. But the final result always depends on the source material. When the brain receives only mirror reflections and sounds mixed with bone conduction, the model it creates of itself and its owner will correspond. Reflection and voice are examples of direct distortions shaping our self-perception at a particular moment. However, as I noted in the introduction, the current I is a chimera. Nerve impulses from different parts of the body take different times to reach the brain. Thus, the very idea of our physical integrity is already a construct of the mind. But actually, the current I is not that important. Let's face it, our consciousness struggles to focus on the present, which itself constantly slips into the past, while our attention wanders between what was and what will be. The current I is nothing more than a 2-second bridge between the past I and the future I. Therefore, let's take a closer look at our past. We derive knowledge about it from two sources, internal and external. The internal source is replenished by our memories. And although we still haven't unraveled the nature of memories, today scientists know much more about it than even 10 years ago. In brief, we have different types of memory, one for facts, another for experiences, a third for muscle movements, and data from all these streams are stored differently in the brain. But most importantly, we carry this information with us everywhere. Internal memories are opposed by external ones, which in turn are divided into two types. The first is records. These include, besides written texts, diaries, journals, etc., audio, video, and photographs. A record is a snapshot of a certain moment, and its advantage is that it does not change. If nothing happens to a photo of you sitting at a desk in 3rd grade, you will always appear the same in it. The second type of external memories comes from other people. Unlike records, this data constantly changes. When we dive into the past in meetings with friends and family, situations often arise where the blind lead the blind. Who now can say what really happened at that Thanksgiving dinner 10, 20, or 30 years ago? Your cousin is just as likely as you to remember the events of your shared childhood incorrectly. But this does not stop us from filling in the gaps in our memories from the sources available to us. In neurology, this filling of lacunae in our memory with fiction is called confabulation. You are probably already guessing what problem is brewing here. Our psyche is arranged so that we experience memories of our past, I as woven together with the current, I into a single temporal continuum. In other words, between the I, that is reading these lines now, and every I from your past since your birth, there is an unbreakable connection. Otherwise, whose memories would you have now? Material evidence only complicates matters. Your childhood photo naturally differs from any recent picture. Neuroscience specialists have long known that the brain, like the rest of the body, matures at least until about age 25, which gives us reason to doubt the reliability of childhood memories, considering that the physical substrate in which they are stored has also changed since then. If our past I has so many gaps, what about our future I? The future is not yet written, but it cannot be said to be completely unknown. For example, we have a pretty good idea of what the weather will be like tomorrow. And if you exclude force majeure and disasters, most likely you will predict your tomorrow quite accurately, within reasonable limits. These short-term forecasts are excellent for our brain. On short time scales, from moment to moment or day to day, a high level of continuity is maintained. On such intervals, our life changes very little. Therefore, despite its imperfections, our memory systems work reliably enough that at the beginning of the week we can plan a dinner at a restaurant or a concert for the weekend. This is possible because the rest of the world also changes very little day to day. On longer time scales, the reliability of predictions weakens. What do you imagine you will be doing in a year? Or in 10 years? When I try to imagine myself even just 12 months ahead, I cannot shake the feeling of looking into a dense fog. It is highly likely that in a year I will be doing the same things as now, teaching, doing science, writing books. This is both comforting and depressing. Comforting because stability is associated with a sense of comfort. Depressing because it means inevitability, like a rocket that cannot change its trajectory once in flight. The future carries a problem because, when imagining who we will become, we can rely only on past experience. Whether we like it or not, the brain involuntarily picks up our past and projects it onto the future. The future, I, is a pure form of simulation, but as in other examples I have given, the quality of the simulation depends on the input data. And if the input data are memories that are blurred and unreliable, then the future, I, will turn out to be fiction. Due to a curious feature of our memory systems, we usually do not remember our past predictions. Any decent artificial neural network would have built-in self-correction mechanisms to learn from its mistakes. Humans, however, suffer from confirmation bias, one of the cognitive distortions. We remember our predictions that came true and conveniently forget the wrong ones. Therefore, not only is our future, I, a fiction, but this fiction, the forecast of upcoming events, is not necessarily going to become more accurate over time. So what is the bottom line? As can be seen from the examples already given, at every next moment we, at various levels, are no longer who we were before. Our memories are inaccurate, and the brain fills in the gaps in the temporal dotted line with fiction, creating the illusion of a whole figure moving along a continuous life path. If this does not trouble you, then you have achieved unprecedented mental equilibrium, and there is no point in reading further. But usually, everyone wonders how we manage to exist with such a simulation. As we will see in the following chapters, modern science shows that a person can still learn to steer the supertanker and to some extent control the process of creating the illusion we call ourselves. So we have a glimmer of hope for a new narrative. But before we start writing and rewriting personal narratives, we will need to dig into the materials from which the brain constructs these narratives. Memories, although imperfect, are the building blocks of the narrative, but they must be arranged in the right, meaning-forming order. In the next chapter, we will explore how the stories we hear in childhood become templates for organizing memories. Since these stories are the first narratives we encounter, they influence us very strongly, and this influence lasts a lifetime. Chapter 2. Early Memories. For as long as I can remember, this custom in our family was unchanging. Closer to the end of the Thanksgiving dinner, when it was time to move on to the pies, Dad would ask, "What is your very first memory in life?" At first, I was afraid of this question, but over time it turned into a routine joke, and we all joyfully made up the most blatant fabrications, fooling Dad. But if you take the question seriously and try to answer honestly, I doubt I could confidently name my earliest memory. We played this game so many times that I no longer distinguish between what I recalled myself and what I was told. Surprisingly, the very stage of life that psychologists consider almost key to identity formation is the most blurred in our memory. It is difficult for us to identify the source of early memories since they are all lumped together in the opening chapter of our life story, which our parents and older relatives recount as a family tradition passed down orally. In this chapter, we will consider the stories told in childhood as a legacy that stays with us for life. Through stories, parents explain to children how the world works, but along with the informational content, they also convey expectations, how they would like to see their children in the future. Parents may not even be aware of why and for what purpose they tell these stories, nor realize how many such stories are told, but their influence is nevertheless enormous. Early childhood is the cradle of the personal narrative because all these stories create a template, a pattern with which we later compare any other stories, primarily the story of our own life. To understand why these stories gain such power over us, we will need to delve into the nature of memory itself and find out how we acquire knowledge in childhood and adolescence, when the brain itself develops and changes at an incredible speed. As we will see, systematic perception and storytelling embed in our consciousness the idea that we are on a journey in which we play the role of the hero. But before we dive deep into science, I must make one more small digression concerning the nature of knowledge itself. We will return to the question of how we determine the truthfulness of various data many times throughout this book, since it underpins all our self-conceptions. When we hear a statement without having direct information from the primary source, it is quite logical to ask the claimant where they know it from. Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher, mathematician, and Nobel laureate, first spoke about two types of knowledge. There is what we know firsthand, not by hearsay, for example, a cyclist's skill at riding a bike. Russell calls this knowledge acquaintance. And there is descriptive knowledge or propositional knowledge, for example, that 2 + 2 = 4. But how do we know this? Because that is how we were taught at school and everyone agrees. However, basic arithmetic is also acquaintance knowledge because one can count on fingers or sticks and personally verify that 2 sticks + 2 sticks = 4 sticks. And the statement, say, that the first U.S. president was George Washington? None of us lived then, so here one has only to believe. This is propositional knowledge, or, simply put, belief and faith.